are good to go. Hi, welcome back to another summer Fishtrap reading. My name is Shannon McNerney. I'm the executive director at Fishtrap. You're going to hear me say that a lot this week, which is a good thing. It's a privilege to get to work with this organization. I am happy to be bringing all of you somebody we've been excited about bringing back, and disappointed that we weren't getting to meet him in person again, but our Fishtrap faculty member and keynote presenter this year, Frank X. Walker, live from Kentucky. Think you're the furthest away for the readings this week. I wanted to also welcome to all the folks out in the public who are tuning in live and hopefully recorded later. We're excited to be able to offer these readings free, and if it's not quite a substitute for sitting around the tent at the lodge at the lake, although today I think it might be preferable because you couldn't necessarily see the lake for the smoke, so there's plus sides. This is the first day of 6 days of readings and events from faculty, 2 of which feature Frank. And for those of you who haven't done this yet, if you there's a tickets available for Frank's keynote, which will be happening Saturday, and we'll be streaming live Saturday at 4 o'clock. You can buy those tickets online at fishtrap.org. And obviously, if you are Summer Fishtrap registrant, those tickets are included with your registration. Summer Fishtrappers who are watching via Zoom during the reading, if you have questions for Frank, please feel free to type them in the chat. We're going to ask, we're going to take 5 or 10 minutes at the end and answer a few questions if you have them. And with that, let me introduce Frank. Frank X. Walker has published 10 collections of poetry, including Turn Me Loose, the Unghosting of Medgar Evers, which was awarded the 2014 NAACP Image Award for Poetry. Frank coined the term Affrilachia and has co-founded the Affrilachian Poets. He has received many honors, including fellowships and residencies with Cave Canem, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the Kentucky Arts Council. He is currently a professor of English and African American and Africana studies at the University of Kentucky in Lexington. My tongue is tripping over my teeth. I wanted to also talk a little bit about how we were lucky enough to, I won't say discover, but rediscover Frank post Rich Weinschneider. A couple of years ago when we were at the lake, I got to have breakfast with Luis and Cindy Arrea, and they said, Frank, you need to get Frank back. Frank wants to come back to Summer Fishtrap. Well, Frank had been here prior to that. It predated Mike and I, and neither one of us had had the chance to meet him. But when Luis and Cindy Arrea tell you you need to do something, you respond. And we were super excited when he said, yes, I will come. And then the pandemic hit, but he was game and jumped in with us on the experiment of doing this virtually. And we said, oh, we got to bring him back. He was so great. He's going to be our keynote for resilience. This is going to happen. And he said yes again. And here we are. So I want to thank Frank for sticking with us for 2 years of virtual. We will get you to this lake. It's going to happen. And he's as much a part of Fishtrap as anybody I can think of. So I am grateful for your perseverance and your commitment to sticking with us. Frank, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, if you don't mind. Why? I asked Denise this. I'm going to ask you why Fishtrap? What makes? I mean, especially being in Kentucky, and you're decided to opt in with a Writing in the West organization. Why Fishtrap?
Easy button for me. The Wallowa Valley. The land, that space has such a magnetic pull for me of anywhere Chief Joseph has walked and the Nez Perce have spent any time was where I wanted to be when I first came to Fishtrap. I had been out west probably 3 summers in a row prior to a book I wrote about Lewis and Clark coming out to do research. And I was trying to get around as much as possible to as many places as possible. And I regretted not getting to the reservation or to the Wallowa Valley. And so I saw this as an opportunity to get back out there, to be closer at least. And in fact, when I was there, that first reading at Fishtrap, there were 4 elders from the tribe who came over to the reading from the Nez Perce tribe. And I had told them how hungry I was to come and visit the res and spend some time there. So they had invited me back to the reservation and brought my son, and we spent almost a month there. And it turned into a research trip, and the result was a second book because of all this new information that I was generously given while we were there and among the people. And I felt like I was revisiting York's visit with the Nez Perce. And so to me, it was a kind of homecoming for the book I was writing, for the book I would write next. And since then, I've imagined a third book. So it's now a trilogy of poetry about the same relationships that centered around one African-American man, servant to William Clark, who was part of the Lewis and Clark expedition. And the third book is really about him wanting to come back to this land again. So I laugh and I think about how eager my family has been to get out to Fishtrap, because I've talked about the space and the people and the land so much that last year and this year we had decided very early that this will be our family vacation as well. So my whole family was coming. So the disappointment is pretty big in this house this year, yeah, as it was last summer. And I think I should have asked for 3 packets of goodies to come in the mail so I could spread it around the family to kind of warm that missing thing that has happened for them. And it's still happening for me. I'm still looking forward to returning to the lake and to walk the trails, to ride horseback and, go kayaking, just be in that space.
We will get you here. I promise. I promise. So, well, Frank, I want to let people hear what you do with that pen of yours. So, or keyboard or pencil. Let people hear what you've got reading for us. So if you're ready, let's turn it over to Frank. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate all of you out there of whatever format joining me for this. If I could make a recommendation, you don't really even have to watch this. I think listening makes it easier to travel with me. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read a few poems from the first 2 collection, and then read primarily from a 3rd collection, which I'm very excited about because the 3rd collection was purchased by a film company out in LA and is being made into a feature film. And they've already started pre-production, and will be filmed primarily in the Idaho, Oregon, Montana region. So I've been out for another month just to be part of that process. What I want to do is introduce some of you to York. This young man left Kentucky, where I currently live, which one of the primary reasons he's that important to me, to become part of the Lewis and Clark expedition. There are many things to know about him, including what he looked like physically, even though there are several paintings and pieces of art that reimagine the expedition members. Most of them misrepresent York and recreate him as a small miniature version of himself, when in fact he was the facsimile of a NFL defensive lineman, if you can imagine. A man that large, with very African features, very dark skin, very broad nose, full lips, coarse hair, so much so that Native Americans renamed him a Katanka, who walked like man. They called him Big Medicine because he was such a vision they had never seen. They just assumed he had this great power. And part of that power was mired in his character. His relationship with Native Americans was very, very strong, to the point where when he was among the Nez Perce, he ended up marrying the chief's daughter, Red Grizzly's daughter. And there's information about his courtship with that same daughter. The two of them canoeing on the Clearwater River is buried in the oral histories of the Nez Perce people. And one of the things that happened after the summer I returned with my son is that, you know, they gave me a copy of the transcribed oral histories and asked me to do something with this information. And it became the second book. So I'm going to read a little from the first book, second book, and then from the manuscript, which comes out next year, in fact, as part of a set of the three. This first poem, opening poem, is called Wind Talker. And it imagines York has spent that first year and a half with the men in the party. You know, a lot of people who are unfamiliar just assumed it was just Lewis and Clark. People heard about the dog, Seaman. They heard about one or two other members of the expedition, but most people didn't know there were at least 42 people that were part of this great expedition. So imagine York growing up landlocked, having never seen an ocean, never seen a waterfall, never seen any fish bigger than a catfish, being part of this expedition and getting to the ocean for the first time ever. And imagine him also having watched his master write in the journal every night, and 4 other people write details and draw maps and draw pictures of things they encountered to reproduce the story when they return with other people. But imagine being illiterate, but also thinking that you want to be able to tell this story when you get back home. So I imagine York, who is married and has a wife back in Kentucky, standing at the ocean for the first time, being overwhelmed and thinking about his wife back at home, and thinking about all the things he would want to tell her once he sees her again, and missing her terribly. So it opens in that space with York at the ocean. And it's called Wind Talker. If I can make my words dress their naked selves in blackberry juice, lay down on a piece of bark, sheep, or onion skin like massa do. If I could send a letter home to my wife, floated in the wind on wings or water, I'd tell her about Katanka and all the wide and high places this side of the big river, how his family, numbering 3 for every star in the sky, look like a force when they graze together, turn into the muddy Missouri, when they thunder along faster than any horse, making the grass lay down long after the quiet has returned. How they don't so much as raise a tail when I come around with my woolly head and tobacco skin, like I'm one of them, making their rickarah and Mandan. Think me, big medicine, Tatanka, who walk like man. Today, we stood on the edge of all this, looked out at so much water, the mountains we crossed to get here seem a little smaller. As I watch fish the size of cabins dance in the air and splash back in the water like children playing, I think about her, and if we gonna ever be free, then I close my eyes and pray that I don't live long enough to see Massa make this ugly too. God's house. When we first left Kentucky, the trees had commenced to dressing up the fall harvest, and the garden was already full of pumpkins and squash. Master Clark didn't ask me to go on an expedition. He just said, pack, and pointed to the door. So I gathered up what little I got and more than I carry his and head off to a sail-bearing keelboat where his friend, Master Lewis, is waiting. That boat was so big you could lay any 10 of the 16 men on board or 8 of me head to toe and still have enough room for the dog. We start out on the Ohio and swing up the old man of rivers. When it gets to the mouth of the dark woman they calls the Big Muddy, we sets up winter camp, a good canoe ride from St. Louis. That spring, when the rains come, we cross the Mississippi and commence to climb the Missouri and float right up through heaven on earth. More sky than I ever seen, rocks as pretty as trees, and game so plentiful, they come right down to the riverbank and invites themselves to dinner. Now, I ain't what you would call a scripture quoter, but the first time I seen the waterfall at Missouri, felt a herd of buffalo stampede and looked down from the top of Rock Mountains, it was like church. And where else but God's house can a body servant, big as me, carry a rifle, a hatchet, a bone-handled knife so sharp it can peel the black off a lump of coal, and the white man still closes his eyes and feels safe at night. So I'll stop there from that first opening book called Buffalo Dance, The Journey of York. And the book that I wrote after spending the summer with Inez Pierce was a book called When Winter Come. And what I wanted to do was not only make sure the Native American people were more present in this collection, more present in the story, was to broaden the speakers. The first book was all persona poems in the voice of York. Everything was from his point of view. There are 12 different speakers, most of them women or feminized in the follow-up book, and it's also twice as thick as the first book. The first one I'll read you is in the voice of the river, and river as in plural. And it's the longest poem in the collection, which is not really long, but you can't see that it's also a concrete poem and it's shaped like a river flows on the page. The River Speaks. Epigraph by Langston Hughes. My soul has gone deep like the rivers. Call me the Ohio, the Mississippi, or the Missouri. Call me Wood, Teton, Yellowstone, Milk, Judith, Marias, Jefferson, Madison, Beaverhead, Bitterroot, Snake, Clearwater, or Palouse. Call me the wide-toothed mouth of the Columbia River. Call me after my many creeks, my great falls, my hot springs. I am the snow atop Mount Adams. I am the salty hope in the air at Cape Disappointment. I am she who is at deep and the shallows, a thundering waterfall in a quiet storm. I'm always present in the air, on every tongue, in every drop of milk and blood and tear. You will find me in every thorn and flower, seed and fruit. There is no life without me. I am libation and baptismal pool. I am your sprinkle of holy water. I am older than man and light. I am of God, not God, but like God. I am also inside of every man, for all are born in me, and form there until they are flushed naked into the world, and I remain there in them like God until they depart and return to dust. Captain Clark saw me as a great wet road that could be conquered with the rowing and paddling of men under his command. So I showed him my many rapids and waterfalls, made his men carry their own boats and supplies around me for miles at a time. These were the good years. White men had not yet studied the beaver and learned how to redirect my paths, manage my flow, harness it for their own use, attempt to enslave me too. Captain Lewis was different. To him, I was a piece of art. He marveled at the natural fall of my waterlocks and felt humbled by the beautifully carved rock masterpieces that adorn my canyons and walls. While I have been at most an open way for the white man, to the red man, I've been viewed as a helpmate. Considered a wife, carrying their salmon and trout, providing for their transportation and nourishment, surrounding them, moving through them in the heat of the sweat lodge, answering their prayers when they dance. But the Black one was the only one taught to both fear and respect me. And though I was the road that carried the ships of death to and from Africa's shores, I became the waiting outstretched arms for those who refused to be enslaved, for those who trusted me to rock their babies off to sleep. My ocean floors are covered with his people's resistance. I carry their spirit in every splash I make. Their humming, their lost voices, their last words have become a part of my sweetest song. When he is whole again, when York knows what he is worth, I will well up inside of him and he will hear them sing. This next poem is in the voice of Native American shaman, Watkuis speaks. We knew they were coming. Our medicine men had been telling of their arrival since before I was born. When our warriors saw their small herd, their first thoughts were to kill them all, and with it, the destruction they carried. This I also believed they should do until I saw the Black one standing off to the side, a small mountain pretending to be a man pretending to be on a leash. To the unlearned eye, he looked to be all alone. But when I stared at him with my spirit eye, I could see a great long woman standing behind him with her arms crossed, and a herd of strange looking buffalo, large black cats, striped horses, and other wild beasts like I've never seen in my dreams stretching to where the sun rises. I did not know what destruction his death would earn us, so I counseled against it and talked with the white men who were kind to me when I was young and lost, which caused the warriors to put away their weapons and welcome them with open arms. These next poems are in the voice of York's Nez Perce wife. Like raven from head to toe. His hair and strength was not unlike that of the woolly-headed buffalo. Some of my people thought he had been burned by a great fire. Others thought he had painted himself in charcoal, as was the custom for warriors returning from the warpath, making him the bravest among his party. 2 hard, wet fingers did not remove the black from his forehead or arms, nor did the sweat from our naked turtle dance make his salty skin any less like the night's. Art of seduction. I know a hungry man's eye can undress a woman from across a smoldering fire because York did it. When I grew warm to his advances, I gave him permission and invited him over without ever opening my mouth. I looked away, then back, then away, then back so slow. When my eyes returned to meet his, it made his nostrils flare and my heart beat like 2 drums in my chest. He didn't have a courting flute, so the first music we made between us was a way of looking into each other's eyes and exchanging naked promises so full of heat, Passerbyers would swear we were already man and wife. His big hands were rough from a life full of hard work, but when they were filled with me, each one became a party of men deep in the wilderness, intent on exploring every mound and knowing all of the hollowed out and sacred places. Quiet storm. While out searching for chemists and other roots, we celebrate our choosing each other. I made pictures with my fingers and lips, trying to make the raven sun understand the number and beauty of the butterfly. A rainstorm came out of the hills and forced us to crawl under a giant pine's outstretched wings. The soft bed of needles under us and the music and the steady downpour left us so warm and wet, we barely noticed when the rain stopped and moved on across the valley. Before our lips and tongues finally parted, we floated like two eagles circling mid-air, trying to pass off a just caught salmon a mile above the clear water. And I'll read Midnight Ride, the last one from her voice, and also share that this is the poem that got the book banned from middle schools in Kentucky. Midnight Ride. After the fires die down, a moon full of shine allows us to wander off into the night's arms. Urged on by the river and the night's music, our two quickly become one. Straddled aboard him, a buffalo robe around my shoulders and nothing else, I close my eyes and ride low and close, where a hunter tracks buffalo in the deep winter snow. Our gentle trot becomes a gallop, and after a good sweat, our gallop becomes a quiet stand. Then we bow our heads and wait for our breaths to catch up. After a quick dip in the cold river, I mount back up for warmth and we ride slow and long until my legs quiver and York finds the strength to harness himself. When he carries me back home to our mat, folded up in his arms like a child, we lie down in the lap of the night, both empty and full, and sleep. So those are the Nez Perce Bride's contribution. And I want to skip ahead a little bit because the thing that made it a little more complicated was York had a wife back in Kentucky. So I imagine him being so moved with the Nez Perce relationship that he was unable to hide it when he returned to Kentucky. And I want to give his enslaved wife a few poems and a few things to say. And these poems also comment on the complexity of the enslaved couple's marriage, how much power they did or did not have with each other. Say my name, York's enslaved wife. Folks around here want to call me Auntie, York's old wife, or Master so-and-so's nigga wench, like I ain't got a name of my own. Them don't know how hard it'd be to put aside a little piece of myself that nobody can't never touch but me, a piece big enough to wrestle the long, hard days and keep itself warm at night without a man around. They don't know what it's like to stand in the dark, night after night, wrapped in that buffalo robe he sent, look up at the stars and wonder which ones is looking down on him and believe if something bad happened to him out there that I would feel it too. When he come home, I don't need him to say he loved me. I don't need him to bring me gifts. I just want him to hold me close, make like he glad to see me, bend down to my ear and whisper my name. Unwelcome guest, York's enslaved wife. I don't think York knowed I could see her too. The first time was in the corner of his eye while he looked far off but stared at the plate right in front of him. He didn't say nothing about her, but the way his lips turned up at the ends said plenty. Now I ain't one to sass. His growl helped me to know a slave woman's place. So I sits up all night with both my hands and ears open, waiting to catch her name on his lips. After that, no matter how much he talk of grizzlies, buffaloes, big fish, mountains, or oceans, she become all I can see and all I wants to know. It gets so crowded in our little place, I swears I can almost smell her. And by then, I knows one of us will have to go. Now, if you can appreciate that, not having a legally binding contract also meant that divorce was even more complicated. In a place like, or in a time like this, where enslavement was legal. But York's enslaved wife was not without means. So I'll read this last poem in her voice, called The Sunflower Seed Oil Conjure, York's enslaved wife speaking. First, I get some fresh well water and puts it on to boil. Stirs up a tea brewed from apricot vine, rattlesnake weed, and plenty of honey. Then I sets him down between my knees and with a wooden tooth comb left to me by my mama's mama, commenced to scratching at his scalp till his shoulders look covered with snow. Then I fills up my wash tub with boiling water doctored with peppermint root and sets to scrubbing him slow enough for the heat to open his doors. When his body is clean, I starts back to work on his head, busting up a mean suds and using my fingers to walk up and down his scalp till he let loose a low moan and his eyes start to roll around his head. After I rinses and twists all the forest out, I starts back in with warm sunflower seed oil. Only this time, every finger make its own little circle while both my hands make bigger ones. As it follows each other from the stiff tree limbs in the back of his neck, across his crown to the soft spot while my thumbs dig in slow and deep where the headaches come on. I pours the extra oil into my hands and rub his neck and shoulders down to his ribs and arms. Then, like a turtle dance, I moves back up again. I work slow and hard, and after a while, when I gets all the way to his man's sack, he opens his eyes and be glad it's me. And these poems continue. I will close with two poems, one in York's voice, and that talks about this challenge of being enslaved and married and trying to have a healthy, psychologically sane relationship with the masculine. Can you just come to your house or your cabin and have his way with your wife, and you're expected not to respond? If you do, I mean, your sentence could be death itself. So this is York having the last word on that challenge. It's called To Have and To Hold. It do more harm than good to be enslaved and agree to love forever, when there be folks over us with even more power than death to do us part. Being another man's property, all I can promise is when we in the same quarters, no one will hold you closer or with more tenderness than me. If ever I have to choose between another day of service and death, I will always choose living. Even if Master sell me down the river tomorrow or pair me up with another woman to breed, I will only think of what we had and chase away thoughts of what we had not. I aims to see you every Sunday and Christmas, but if ever my way more than 2 whole seasons without sending back word, untie the ribbons from that broom we jump, mourn for me but a little, then set your mind to figuring on how you gonna stay warm when winter comes. And his wife's comment on the same challenge is called Real Cost, York's enslaved wife. Somewhere out there, he learned to touch me like I'm a woman, and not just some woman, me. In our marriage bed, he seemed as interested in pleasing me as he be in spilling himself. I knew he'd come back changed when new words fall out his mouth like love and freedom and manhood. And there come a look in his eye like he owned all three, free and clear, and don't need no papers to prove it. But it scared me because I seen that look in many a black eye before white hammers nailed it shut or left it frozen open and swinging to teach the rest what anything that smelled like courage cost. I have no doubt he give his life to stay with me. So don't tell him that master taking me back down south. I just kiss him soft to sleep and stare at him long enough to call up his face when I gets old and thankful he still be breathing somewhere when winter come. The interesting part of this story is that when they returned from this trek, York was expecting his freedom as a reward, as had been promised. And Clark did set York free, but it took 10 whole years to do it. And in that, at the beginning of that 10 years, Clark was stationed in St. Louis, and he sent York back down the river to say goodbye to his wife. And I think at the time, they thought it was temporary, but shortly after that, the family that owned his wife moved out of Kentucky. So they never saw each other again. So at the end of this 10 years, I imagine York wanted to make his way back west. The one thing he knows before he left is that his Nez Perce wife was pregnant with a child that wasn't born while he was there. So he knows he has a woman, a wife, and a child all the way out west. And after 10 years, finally getting his freedom, he has a choice to make. The historians say that, according to Clark, that York tried being a free man for a year and didn't like the freedom and made a decision to come back to Clark to be his slave again, but died en route to his return to servitude. Most of us who are fans of York believe that that would not have been the choice that he made, that his freedom is on the shores of the Clearwater, back with his wife and son. So this third collection I'm going to read from imagines York, and I'll read, there are 60 plus poems here, but I'm going to read about a handful to try to respect your time. But I tried to imagine York now making a journey back to the Nez Perce by himself and alone, or as alone as you might imagine he is. But this last one is also infused with a lot more magic and, let's say, belief to get him all the way there. And he has a series of dreams that serve as foreshadowing and also serve as a way to make commentary on what's happening in the rest of America. This first one I'll read is called Chrysalis. York is speaking. I dream the dream again, only this time, instead of being trapped in an eggshell made of steel bars, a white man hangs me up in a tree. When I rest my eyes, all I can hear is the drumming of wings, and I can feel a soft wind blow and blow until my body starts spinning. When it stops turning round, I'm in a cocoon made of black women's hands and eyes and feet. And when the quiet comes, I hear a cock crow and feel the sun move across my face. When there's no more warmth, their eyes start to tear up and water so much I need to swim. But when I come up for air, I break open the cocoon and find myself wrapped in the most beautiful pair of wings. Sometimes the freedom of wings be too much, so I dream the dream backwards, but try to stop before I'm hanging from the tree again. I try to skip around, and I imagine York carried a medicine bag, if not a larger bag, and had keepsakes passed on to him from his parents, from the Nez Perce, from his travels from the ocean. And this is a poem simply called Keepsakes. Hidden among the whatnots, I keeps wrapped in a torn piece of muslin and tucked in the bottom of my bag. Be a shell, old York, give me, that come over on the great passage. A small piece of coal shaped like a buffalo that I pulled out of a cold fire in Kentucky. The iron rock I watched fall from the sky when I was just a boy. A string of grizzly bear claws I won in a fight with the owner. And a shiny arrowhead, blacker than me, that a Nez Perce chief pressed into my hand as a wedding present so many winters ago. I'm not what they call superstitious, nor do I keep them to bring me luck, but together they seem to be my whole story, including the parts I ain't told yet. There's a whole series of poems that imagine him getting reacquainted with the force. He's been wearing boots and fine clothes and been the assistant and companion for a very important man. So he's been eating the best food and traveling to all these places considered civilized. And now 10 years later, he's back in the wild. So he's a little out of touch. The forest won't sing for strangers. A noisy and clumsy man will go hungry in the woods and soon become dinner for the wolves, a plaything for the bears, or target practice for an uncivilized arrow. He's no more welcome here than a brush fire till he learned to walk like he in a white man's church and not in one of his saloons. He won't enjoy the choir of birds greeting every new sun, won't hear woodpeckers or the beaver at work. He won't hear crickets chirp, hawks screech, or any of the mating calls of turkeys, big-head deer, or other beasts in the wild, till he learned to respect the tall quiet, to be no louder than the leaves. He won't even hear the rattler's warning just under his feet. So he also makes various stops along the way at places he hasn't been in 10 years. And in some cases, they remember him. In some of these places he's visited, they arranged for him to sleep with young maidens out of this belief system that his power could be transferred through a woman to another man, or at the very least, his power could be kept in the village in case one of those young women became pregnant. And both of these issues will come up on this return journey. This poem is called Mandan Elder Bears Witness. I recognized a great spirit in him from a distance, and he turned his oak tree self into a gift-bearing acorn before the chief and all our elders. I watched as he pretended the swarm of children buzzing around his legs were invisible until he turned into a great grizzly bear and growled, captured 4 of the swiftest, tossed them across his back and broad shoulders, then pretended he had lost them, much to their delight. He took up the space of 2 men or a wide tree, but grew even larger when I saw how much care he took, declining offers to lie with the wives of old men seeking to acquire his power and strength. When he saw disappointment creep onto their faces, he presented husbands with small knots of tobacco and a fine needle for their wives, then took a long drink of each woman until they felt like desert flowers again. There's a whole inner narrative woven through this that deals with what I imagine York has. I imagine York as a kid saw a falling star. And so he's carrying a tiny meteorite around in his belongings. And there are several poems that deal with that. I want to read one of the poems that talks about what it sounds like for him. And so he spends a lot of time remembering the last 10 years and comparing what he's hearing now with him in the wild to sounds he's familiar with. This is called Music as Medicine. And there are a lot of attention being spent in Afrofuturism. And for me, growing up, that came in the form of musicians like Sun Ra, the jazz musician, and Earth, Wind, and Fire, who sang and dressed on stage like they were from other planets. So this idea of this interstellar travel is something that also shows up in epigraphs and some of the poems. Sun Ra in this poem says, "A lot of people are walking around like empty shells. If they get some music in themselves, they won't be empty. They'll have some sound bodies." That's Sun Ra. And this poem is called Music as Medicine. Listen to crickets and other crawling things, find a part in the night song. Put me in mind of Sundays in the quarter, and how my people sitting around and feeling empty might slowly gather together in the space of each other's breath to sing. How they always build a song that might start with a steady hand on the thigh, a heavy foot, or a solid stick, setting down a heartbeat that everybody can lean into with the eyes closed before stacking other sounds right on top. Might be a well-timed hand clap or a moan. Might be the rattling sound of a mess of dry beans or corn in a wooden bowl. Any kind or size wood on wood can speak truth, can scratch, click, or clack. Anything under the right hand can say doom doom, can say out loud how you really feel. When that song start rising, every body, every age can help but join in. Mothers rocking babies, old folks nodding heads, young feet kicking up their heels and toes in the dirt, or just dragging them to the music our living together make as it rises and rises to everybody who felt empty, now feel full. And I can go on, but I'm just gonna cut myself off right there because as you can see, it's already 11 minutes till the hour, and I don't wanna push you up against the next event. And maybe that leaves time for maybe one or two questions. But thank you for your attention and for listening and for choosing to share this time and space with us.
Great. Thank you so much, Frank. Before I ask, I have a couple of questions from, I think, one of your students. I also want to ask, everything okay over there? We're hearing lots of sirens. So give a hand if you need to run.
Yeah, well, it's, like I said, it's thunderstorm week here.
Yeah.
Lots of accidents because city people can't drive in the rain, but they try anyway. So, and I also live 2 blocks from the fire station.
Okay, all right. Just, don't want you to stick to your craft too much. Yeah. So,
and I'm reading as the house is burning and going down.
So, some curiosity about the book that was banned. If it wonders question if it is still banned in middle schools, and what I'm assuming it had to do with, oh no, sex. But were there other reasons as to why that book was banned?
The reason they gave, and I actually went to that school to read, and they gave me a list of 11 poems that I could not read, and most of them had to do with sex.
Yeah.
I just think it was a maturity issue. They were concerned. And it's a very conservative space. And this particular school system was ultra conservative. So if you don't talk about it, it doesn't exist.
Yeah, I have experienced that on my end of the world. Yes. The other question, I loved this question. If you could pick the actor to play York in his movie, what actor would you choose?
Idris.
Oh, Easy. There you go. Yeah. There you go. Oh my gosh. And is the upcoming film based on all 3 of the collections? And do you have any kind of idea if there's any production schedule when it might come out?
The production schedule has changed so often because the filmmaker is in high demand. He keeps getting these, $1 million offers to make a commercial,
right.
For Nike. But I'm not sure when it will come out at this point. I know that they went ahead and gave permission for the book to come out the next year. So I know they decided to move some things around and finish this particular work. That's his. They also optioned the first two books, so they have at least an opportunity to have flashbacks that come from the first two books. But from what I understand, from what the filmmaker is most interested in, is what happens on that journey during the third book. You know, we spent a month together, also visiting the Nez Res again, and you know, we sat together at a powwow, and he turned to me and said, "This has to be in there. This has to be in there." You know, so there's a poem in here that imagines York's daughter dancing at a powwow in the same way that this beautiful young woman who we happened to see at the powwow, who was also African American and Nez Perce, you know, it was like, that's York's daughter. And if we had started shooting that summer, he would have hired her to play that role. But now it's been 3 years since then.
Yeah.
But she had sisters, and there are other young people there that could fill in that role.
Great. Well, I think we are out of time. I am very grateful. Thank you so much again for honoring us. And we, again, will get to hear your words on Saturday. So with that, we're going to go ahead and sign off for now. For those of you who want to tune in live, we will be back again in less than 10 minutes with our own, another one of our family, Beth Piatote. And again, thank you, Frank. And with that, we will see you in a few minutes.
Thank you, guys.